Adrian Knight had built an empire worth billions. He was known in New York City as the man who never smiled, never trusted, and never forgave. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines that praised his ruthlessness in business but whispered about the cold emptiness in his personal life. The man had everything: penthouse apartments that touched the clouds, sports cars that lined his private garage, and money that bought him silence wherever he demanded it. Yet, despite his wealth, Adrian was paranoid. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. His father's company had nearly been destroyed years ago because of betrayal from someone inside his own household staff. Since then, Adrian had carried one unshakable belief: everyone had a price, and loyalty was nothing but a mask waiting to crack. That's why, when Elena Torres entered his mansion as his newest maid, he didn't just see a hard-working young woman, he saw a test waiting to be given. Elena was nothing like the other staff. She was quiet, almost too quiet, her soft brown eyes always cast downward when she spoke to him. She moved with the grace of someone used to serving, her dark hair tied neatly behind her, her uniform crisp and spotless. Adrian noticed the way she refused to linger in conversations, the way she avoided luxury as if it burned her fingers. Most of his staff looked at his wealth with either envy or awe. Elena looked at it with indifference. And that intrigued him. For weeks, Adrian found himself observing her. She didn't gossip with the others. She didn't ask for favors. She didn't even flinch when he barked orders in his cold tone. Instead, she did her job silently, efficiently, and disappeared into the background as though she were invisible. But Adrian didn't believe in invisibility. Everyone wanted something. Everyone hid something. That night, as the city glowed with neon lights far below his glass penthouse, Adrian made a decision. He would test her. He would find out if Elena was truly loyal, or if she, like so many before, would reveal her true colors when temptation knocked. The plan was simple. He would pretend to be drunk, careless, vulnerable. He would leave his wallet out, his safe unlocked, his guard lowered. He wanted to see what Elena would do when the powerful billionaire she served seemed to lose control. The evening began with him sitting at the marble bar of his penthouse, pouring himself a drink. Of course, it wasn't real liquor, it was apple juice cleverly swapped into a whiskey decanter. Adrian didn't drink. He never allowed himself the weakness. But tonight, weakness was his disguise. He waited until he heard the faint sound of Elena's footsteps in the hallway before staggering toward the living room. He loosened his tie, messed his usually perfect hair, and dropped onto the velvet couch as though gravity had defeated him. "Mr. Knight." Elena's voice was soft, careful, as she stepped inside. She was holding a silver tray, ready to collect the empty glasses he had instructed the staff to leave. Adrian slurred his words, dragging them out with exaggerated clumsiness. "Elena, come here." She froze, her dark eyes flickering with confusion before she approached. "Sir, are you all right?" He let out a heavy laugh, leaning back, one hand dramatically slipping over the arm of the couch. I'm perfectly fine. Just had a little too much." Her brows furrowed. "You don't usually drink." That caught his attention. She had noticed. "Interesting. Maybe tonight I wanted to forget," he muttered, forcing his voice into a raw, unguarded tone. He pulled his wallet from his pocket and let it fall to the floor, bills spilling out. Then he tossed the keys to his safe onto the glass table nearby. Every movement was calculated, each mistake deliberate. Elena stiffened. Her gaze flicked to the wallet, then back to his face. She didn't move toward it. "Not yet." "Sir, should I call the doctor?" she asked. Adrian shook his head and let out a dramatic sigh. "No doctor. Just stay. Sit." He patted the space beside him, though he knew she wouldn't dare. And she didn't. She stood still, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. But her breathing had changed. Quicker, sharper, as though the sight of him in this state unsettled her deeply. Adrian closed his eyes halfway, pretending to drift into unconsciousness while keeping his attention sharp. This was the moment. Would she take the money? Would she try the safe? Would she call someone? Minutes stretched in silence. He could hear the faint hum of the city outside, the ticking of the grand clock on the wall. And then, Elena moved. Her steps were careful, hesitant, but deliberate. She bent down, her slender fingers brushing against the wallet. Adrian's heart thudded in triumph. So, She was like the rest. But instead of slipping the cash into her pocket, she began gathering the bills neatly, tucking them back into the wallet. She set it carefully on the table, aligning it beside the keys as though it were her duty to restore order to his chaos. Adrian's smirk almost broke his act, but he held still. She hesitated, staring at the keys to the safe. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling slightly. This was it, the moment of truth. Would she? Alina's fingers closed around the keys. She looked over her shoulder once, confirming he appeared unconscious. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her jaw tight with a decision that seemed to weigh on her soul. Then she walked toward the study. Adrian's chest tightened with adrenaline. She was going for the safe. He had been right. She was hiding behind that quiet mask all along. Silently, he rose from the couch, his drunken act forgotten, and followed her footsteps. She moved swiftly, as though she had been inside his study before. His suspicion deepened. Inside the dimly lit study, Elena approached the tall mahogany bookshelf that concealed the safe. With steady hands, she knelt, inserted the key, and turned it. The metallic click echoed in the silence. Adrian's pulse raced. He was seconds away from confirming his theory. But then, what she did made his breath catch. Instead of taking anything, Elena reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. Her hands shook as she placed it gently inside the safe. She closed it, locked it again, and whispered something under her breath he couldn't hear. Adrian froze in the shadows. What the hell had she just hidden in his safe? He had expected theft, betrayal, greed. But what he saw was something entirely different, something far more mysterious. Elena lingered for a moment, her eyes glistening as though she fought back tears. Then she wiped her face quickly, straightened her uniform, and walked out of the study with her usual calm expression, as though nothing had happened. Adrian stayed behind, staring at the locked safe. What was in that envelope? Why had she risked everything to put something inside instead of taking something out? For the first time in years, Adrian Knight felt shaken. And he knew one thing for certain: this was no ordinary maid. Adrian Knight stood frozen in his study long after Elena left, the sound of the safe's lock still echoing in his mind. He had staged the perfect trap, expecting betrayal. But instead of stealing, Elena had given. An envelope slipped inside as though she were hiding part of herself within his guarded walls. For a man who prided himself on control, Adrian now felt dangerously unsettled. Curiosity burned hotter than suspicion. What had she hidden? He waited until the mansion grew silent. Midnight passed. His staff had long since retired to their quarters, except Elena. She always worked late, finishing chores no one asked her to. When the silence stretched, Adrian crossed the study, his hand hovering over the safe. For years, he had protected this vault with paranoia, convinced it was the last shield between him and the world's deceit. But now, all he wanted was to unlock it. With a click, the door swung open. There it was, the envelope, crumpled at the edges, worn from being carried, and sealed tightly as though its contents mattered more than gold. Adrian hesitated. Opening it felt like trespassing into something raw, something deeply personal. But restraint had never been his strength. He tore it open. Inside was a faded photograph of a young girl, no more than 10 years old, with messy braids and a radiant smile. The girl stood beside a hospital bed, holding the frail hand of a woman who looked painfully ill. On the back of the photo, a note was scrawled in shaky handwriting. For Elena, never forget why you fight. Beneath the photograph were hospital bills. Overdue, stamped with red ink. The kind of debt that could crush a person's soul. Adrian's chest tightened. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces began to form. Elena hadn't been eyeing his wealth. She had been protecting something, her family. The next morning, Adrian couldn't focus. He sat at his glass dining table, untouched coffee steaming in front of him. He wasn't a man easily distracted, yet every time Elena entered the room with her quiet efficiency, he found his gaze pulled toward her. She didn't know he had discovered her secret. She moved like always, measured, composed, almost invisible. But now he saw the tension in her shoulders, the way exhaustion shadowed her eyes, the faint redness from tears she must have shed in silence. He needed answers. Elena, he called suddenly. She stopped mid-step, clutching a tray of polished silverware. Yes, sir. Sit. His voice was firm, but not cold. She blinked, confused. Sir. That wasn't a request. Reluctantly, she set the tray down and lowered herself into the chair across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Adrian leaned forward, his gaze sharp. What were you doing in my study last night? Her entire body stiffened. I don't understand. He didn't let her lie. Don't insult me, Elena. I saw you. You used the keys. You opened my safe. Color drained from her face. Her lips parted, then closed again as though words were too heavy to form. Why? His voice softened, not with mercy, but with something far more dangerous, curiosity. Why hide something there? Tears brimmed in her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. You weren't supposed to see. I did, Adrian said firmly. Now explain. For a long moment, she was silent. Then, with trembling hands, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the truth, another copy of the photograph. She slid it across the table toward him. That's my little sister, she whispered. Her name is Sophia. Adrian glanced down at the smiling girl in the picture. The resemblance was undeniable. Same dark eyes, same quiet strength lingering even in a child's expression. She's sick, Elena continued, her voice breaking. Our mother died years ago. Sophia. She has a rare condition. The treatments cost more than I can ever afford. Every dollar I earn goes to keeping her alive. Adrian's throat tightened, though he masked it. So why put this in my safe? Elena's eyes shone with raw honesty. Because I needed to remind myself. Every time I walked past your wealth, your world of excess, I felt small. Tempted. But then I would see that envelope and remember, I can't betray who I am. I can't steal. I have to fight the right way. She swallowed hard, so I locked it away. Somewhere even I couldn't easily reach it. To keep myself from breaking. Her words struck him harder than any betrayal could have. Adrian had spent years believing loyalty didn't exist. That every person's heart could be bought. And here was Elena. Poor, desperate, drowning in debt. And instead of stealing, she had protected herself from ever crossing that line. For the first time, Adrian felt shame. Days turned into weeks. Something shifted between them after that morning. Adrian found himself watching Elena more closely, not with suspicion, but with an unfamiliar ache he couldn't name. He noticed how she hummed softly while dusting the grand piano, how her hands lingered on the bookshelves as though she longed to read the stories she never had time for. He noticed the way she smiled only when she spoke on the phone with her sister, her voice softening, carrying warmth he'd never heard directed at him. He had built his life on power, but Elena carried a strength that humbled him. And that scared him more than anything. One evening, as rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, Adrian made a decision. He walked into the living room, where Elena was arranging fresh flowers. Elena. She turned, startled. Yes, sir. He hesitated, rare for a man who never questioned his words. You don't have to call me, sir, anymore. Confusion flickered across her face. Then, what should I call you? Adrian. The sound of his name in her voice did something to him. Something dangerous. But just as their fragile connection began to grow, the past came crashing in. One late night, Adrian returned from a business meeting to find Elena cornered in the kitchen by one of his senior staff members, a man named Gregory, who had served the Knight family for years. Gregory's voice was sharp. You think we don't know what you're doing? Hiding things in the safe. Playing innocent. Women like you always come for the money. Elena stood frozen, her back against the counter, fear flickering in her eyes. Before she could respond, Adrian's voice cut through the air like ice. Enough. Gregory turned, startled. Sir, I was only. You were accusing a woman of something you know nothing about, Adrian snapped. His gaze darkened. Get out. But sir, pack your things. You're finished here. Gregory's protests fell silent under Adrian's glare. He stormed out, leaving Elena trembling in the quiet. She whispered, You didn't have to. Yes, I did, Adrian interrupted, his tone softer now. No one will ever question your place here again. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Weeks later, Adrian made another decision, one that would change both their lives. He invited Elena to the study. The same room where he had once tried to trap her. When she entered, nervous and unsure, he gestured to the safe. Open it. Her brows knitted in confusion, but she obeyed. Inside, instead of bills and documents, she found something new. A check, signed in her name, large enough to cover every hospital bill and more. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Adrian said firmly. Because it's not charity, it's an investment. In what? She whispered. In you, he replied. In loyalty. In the first person who's proven to me that not everything has a price. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Adrian. He reached out, his hand brushing hers for the first time. The touch sent a current through him, raw, unfamiliar, but undeniable. I thought pretending to be drunk would expose your weakness, he admitted. Instead, it exposed mine. I don't know how to trust. But, you've shown me how. Her fingers tightened around his. For once, the billionaire who had everything felt like he finally gained the one thing he had always been missing. Months later, Alina's sister received treatment, her smile brighter than ever in the photographs Elena proudly showed him. The mansion no longer felt like a cold fortress. It felt alive, with laughter, warmth, and something Adrian never believed he'd find. Love. He had set a trap expecting betrayal. Instead, he found the only person strong enough to shake him to his core. And for Adrian Knight, that was the greatest wealth of all.